recording. Okay, so welcome. This is Amol Dikshit. I've been running this Salesforce developer community group in Stamford since last more than uh, almost like more than 1 year. It's on 1.5 years now, and yeah, so it's been fun, and we have been having these meetings every month, and yeah, so that's all about me. So do you want to go, Michael, or sorry, Mika first? Whatever.
Oh, yeah. My name is Micah Rose Emerson, and I am the community coordinator at Provar. And I'm in Kansas City where fall has hit.
Oh,
And I'm really excited to just be here and hopefully um, just get to hear what Michael has to say, any questions that folks might have, and also be able to just connect. So I'm excited that this is happening. And Amal, you're a really great leader, and so I'm really excited that you put this together.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So, okay, I think we have Amy here or Aicha. Aicha, do you want to go next? Do you want to introduce yourself if you're there?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Aisha. I'm a Salesforce solution architect. I'm from Morocco, and I'm happy to join today.
Thank you, Aicha. Then we
Great
have
to have
Amy.
you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Cool. So then we have Amy. Not sure if you are on the mute or whatever. I don't know. Okay, that's fine. Do you want to go, Michael, next?
Sure, and I'll introduce myself in a more formal fashion when I run
Sure.
through my slides. But yeah, just a brief introduction. I'm Michael Dailey, and as the slide said, I'm the director of solution engineering here at Provar. But don't let that scare you. I'm a very laid back kind of guy. I live in Nashville, so I'll be hosting today from this beautiful 70-degree sunny weather location from inside my house. But yeah, I'm excited to talk today about how we can close the test automation gap and increase velocity. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today.
That's great. I think we can start with our session. Thanks. It's all you, Michael.
All right. So I did that brief little introduction there on myself, just a bit more on that. I have been in the DevOps space for over 5 years now. Also started my career as a developer and a QA automation engineer. So that's kind of how I came to know about Provar. And I, like I said, I am located here in Nashville. I enjoy traveling with my wife and my son, who is now 5 months old. So it's very exciting. I do enjoy playing Jenga. And of course, I love barbecue. I'm in the South, so I can't get enough of that stuff. I do not like country music, however. I did want to throw that out there.
Whoa.
So just a brief overview of the agenda today. I want to talk a little bit about what Provar is or who we are as a company. And then I'm going to give you guys some very valuable testing best practices that we have. And these are not specific to any one tool, just more like a general testing best practices that we want to offer. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how test automation can increase your velocity in terms of releases and deployments. Then I'll get into the demo. That's the exciting stuff. That's what you're here for. And of course, at the very end, we'll have time for questions. So I'll have a Q&A near the end. And I do want to note that we are going to be raffling off a Salesforce certification voucher for up to $250. So expect an email post-event once we gather all the virtual and the in-person guests. I know this is only virtual, so it might be a little different. And you'll see this nice little GIF here that I've created. I kind of throw this in there on a lot of my presentations because I do work in sales now, but I'm a technical guy, and this is my general reaction when someone starts giving me a sales pitch as a developer. So I thought it was kind of humorous. And it is to say that this is not a sales pitch. I do work for Provar, of course, so I will be showcasing it as part of my demo. But it really is meant to be more of a holistic solution. So just keep that in mind as we're going through here. So who is Provar, or what are we as a company? Provar is two main products. So Provar Automation is the product that most of you may be familiar with if you're familiar with Provar as a company. It is our test automation solution for Salesforce. And then we also have Provar Manager. This is our newly launched product that is on the Salesforce App Exchange. It is our quality hub for Salesforce, and it's also an integration hub. So integrating with different third-party solutions and other tools like Jira, Capado, Flowsum, as well as the newly, well, it's still in beta, I guess, but Salesforce DevOps Center. So that's pretty exciting. We're actually the first partner to integrate with Salesforce DevOps Center. So that's been a very exciting process. I won't be showing anything on Manager today. This will be focused on the automation piece, but I did kind of set the stage for who we are as a company. All right, so some testing best practices. So I always begin this conversation by saying that whether or not you're a QA or an admin or a developer or an architect, everyone is involved in the testing lifecycle of your application in some way, shape, or form. So it's good to be aware of how testing is done and what are the best practices around that. So like I always say, and this is what we tell our clients as well when we onboard, we always like to begin every automated test from a manual test. And the reason for that is kind of multifaceted, but really it's just because you want to have a source of truth, right? So if you start your automation journey and you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know what the workflow is, you don't have your steps clearly defined, you don't have your data sources defined, it can be a little bit scattered and you're kind of, just kind of clicking around, doing things and building out tests with no real clear direction. So that's why we throw that in there. Another really important point here is that all testing should include positive and negative scenarios. And what I mean by that is most of the time you'll hear us talk about happy path or unhappy path. So that's what I mean. A lot of testing, you just kind of target the happy path. What is going to happen when I give the application correct data? It should work correctly for correct input, of course. But what happens if I give incorrect input? What happens if the user goes off script? So we need to be testing for those kinds of scenarios as well. Another key point here is that all test cases should be managed in a centralized location that everyone has access to or is easily accessible. Now, one of these could be Provar Manager. Like I mentioned before, it is a test management application that's built on Salesforce, but there are a lot of others that work just as well that a lot of our other clients and prospects are using as well, such things as X-Ray, Zephyr, any kind of test management solution. A lot of people still use Excel, in fact. As long as you have some kind of data source for all of your test cases, where they're housed, where all the data is stored, things like that, as well as results. You want to be able to keep track of your results in a easily to find location. So when we talk about regression testing, of course, automated tests, there's a number of different kinds of testing strategies. There's regression testing, functional testing, integration testing, unit testing. You could kind of go down the list, and they invent new kinds of testing every other day. But when we talk about regression test, really what that means is testing something that has already been tested once before, or maybe even many times. And the importance of this is, and when you introduce a new feature, right, for the first time, it's not regression tested. It's just tested from the sense of, does it work properly or not? But then every time you have new additions to that same code repository that could interfere with that feature, you need to make sure that that regression testing is covering that. So that way you're not unexpectedly affecting things in different areas of the application. So it is a pretty intuitive thing to think about, but we always throw that in there as a testing best practice. Now, this is kind of just a catchy point, but testing early and testing often, you hear the term shifting left. And really what we mean by that is a lot of times testing is put on the back burner, right? It's kind of delayed to the very last stage of the cycle in your sprint or your deployment strategy. But we want to kind of shift that narrative and that perception and the importance of testing earlier on. So that way you catch those bugs in your development environments, in your sandbox environments, before they get to staging or production, right? So the earlier you catch a bug, the amount of effort and time that it takes ultimately to resolve those bugs is much smaller in terms of if it gets deployed into a production environment. Now, risk coverage and test coverage are kind of those two different things that we use to gauge where we're at in terms of our testing maturity. When I talk about risk coverage being greater than test coverage, really what I mean by that is, rather than just thinking about the number of test cases that you have as a metric to use to evaluate where you are, risk coverage is a much better way to kind of gauge that. Really, risk is two different things. It's impact and it's frequency. So when you're thinking about how often something occurs, how often a user goes to that particular web page, how often they interact with those elements on the page, that's the frequency. And then the impact is what would happen if that particular feature or that application or that tab were to not function properly, or if it were to break entirely. what would the impact be on the business? So test scenarios that cover as much risk as possible will give you much more value. And the whole idea is that you get as much value out of your testing effort with as little test cases as possible, right? So if I can get just as much value out of 50 test cases as opposed to 200, I've just saved my company a lot of man hours and not having to create all those tests with giving the same amount of coverage. So that's the idea behind that. So I do want to kind of shift a little bit. So talking about some testing best practices. This is, before I kind of talk through these points here, this is a tweet that I kind of found humorous from a few years ago that I just love to always include whenever I can. It says a QA engineer walks into a bar, orders a beer, orders 0 beers, orders 9999999 beers, orders a lizard, orders -1 beers, orders whatever that is. And then the first real customer walks in and asks where the bathroom is, and the bar bursts into flames, killing everyone. So this tweet is just kind of, it's funny, but it's also kind of true, right? Like, it's very relatable. Like, we've been in those scenarios where we just don't think of everything that could happen. And so test automation is really, that's where it comes into play. So we're not trying to get rid of anyone's jobs, and we're not trying to put the QA out of work. What we're trying to do is free you up to do those kinds of exploratory testing that is way more interesting, right? As a developer or an architect as well, you want to be spending more times on new cool features rather than just fixing bugs all the time. So automation can help with that as well. So that's when we talk about reducing monotony, those daily tasks that become, very repetitive, the same thing every day, testing for different data points, which is kind of what this tweet is saying. And then also, like, not thinking about, oh, what happens if they do something off script? Like I said before, the bar could burst into flames. But really, how test automation helps with velocity is increasing the consistency across the entire organization. So when you think about automation in general, right? Forget about testing for a second. When you're thinking about anything that's automated, the whole goal with automating any kind of process or function is to make it repeatable, right? You want to get the same results every single time you go through that process. And that's the goal of automation, is to take the human element out of it and take away the room for human error. Like, if we don't do the exact same thing, or if we have multiple resources testing the same feature, we want to make sure that we're improving our consistency across the board. And also, I talked about regression cycles, and I talked about how testing is generally left to the end of the sprint cycle. We want to be able to accelerate that regression. And what we mean by that is the shorter amount of time it takes to test, the shorter amount of time it takes to do releases. And we can do more releases over the same period of time if we have automated tests that are taking care of those testing. And then, of course, the autonomous aspect. Because it's automated, it doesn't need to be visited or handheld by a particular user, right? So it's fire and forget. You can schedule these on a nightly basis. You can schedule these to run when no one's in the office, on the weekends, whatever you want to do. You don't need an actual resource sitting at their desk, clicking through the application and doing all the things. So autonomy is a really big thing because, again, it allows you to do other tasks that are way more meaningful, way more interesting, and less monotonous. Okay, that's kind of my spiel as far as like testing best practices, automation, increasing your velocity. Now, I really want to take some time to get into an actual demo. So I'm going to jump to my demo time slide and jump right into it. Okay, so before I just kind of walk through this demo, I want to kind of set the scene. So what I'm actually going to be doing here. So what I typically like to demo is, I don't want to get too into the weeds. And again, this isn't a sales pitch, but I kind of want to walk you through a scenario. So we're in the Dreamhouse application, which is one of the Salesforce apps on the app gallery, which you can download and set up for free on your developer orgs, on your Scratch orgs, sandboxes, you name it. So I have it set up here in an actual Scratch org. And what I'm going to be running through is a scenario where I'm creating a test case to create a broker record. And I'm going to be interacting with a particular field. And that field is going to be the status field. So if we look at the broker object real quick, I'll just go ahead and bring open this screen just so you can see it. So this status field at the moment is a text field. Now I'm going to be changing this using Salesforce DX commands to actually be a pick list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build out a test case that creates the broker object, fills out all these fields, and then I'm going to make the update to change the status field to a pick list. And then I'm going to run the same test back again to make sure that it's still working properly, just to kind of illustrate test automation and where it fits into this whole life cycle. So what I'm going to actually do to build out the test is utilize Provar's test builder, which is a Chrome extension that loads alongside my Salesforce browser here. This Chrome extension allows me to interact with fields on the page. So like I normally would if I'm an admin or if I'm a developer, if I'm familiar with the application, if I know what the scenario is, then I can use Provar. I don't have to be an automation engineer or anything like that. And just to kind of illustrate that point, I'm going to walk you through creating a test case here. So I'm going to go to the broker tab and I'm going to right click on the new field. And so what we see here from the Chrome extension is it gives me this option to add to a test case. Now what this will do is it will load the field from the page that I'm on, and it uses the metadata API for Salesforce to interact with the page and determine how to locate that element on the screen. If you're familiar with Selenium or other traditional automation frameworks, they're very reliant on the DOM or the HTML or the page layouts, the page structure to build out the automation. And that tends to be a very brittle way of doing things. As we all know with Salesforce, they love to change things, and they love to change things a lot of times without warning. Or maybe it's kind of a hidden change. Maybe they snuck it in, right? So having automation that covers things from a metadata standpoint is much more reliable in the long term, because you're not having to go back after release and make changes to it. So I'm interacting with this new button here. And what I need to tell Test Builder is how I'm going to interact with that particular button. Now, it is a button, so it's actually determined automatically that it needs to click this particular button. So I'm done with this step. I'll just click Add and Do. Now, what that's going to do is two things. It's going to make sure I'm on the correct screen, and then it's going to actually perform the action for me. So as I'm building out my test, I'm also getting instant validation of whether or not the test case is working properly. So there we go. It's clicked that new button. And just again, to illustrate that navigational component, which wasn't a step that I had to add, by the way, I'm going to go back to the beginning here and go to Home. And then I'm going to, in Test Builder, I'm going to step backwards to that previous step here. So I'm just right click and go step 2. And it's going to take me back to that step and pause. And then if I click resume, it'll execute that flow again. So it's going to navigate me to the broker home screen, and it's going to click the new button. So again, all this is happening in a user interface. I haven't coded anything behind the scenes. There's no development effort required here. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more fields. The same way I was doing before, I'm just right-clicking, adding to test case. And now the interaction type is set rather than click, because it's a text entry. So if I go ahead and provide a value here, I could type something in. I could type demo 123, right? But as I was saying, going back to our testing best practices, right? We want to think more long-term, and we want to think about how we can repeat this process over and over again. We're thinking about regression. We're thinking about running this test case multiple times. Therefore, we want to use something called data-driven testing. So what that really means is utilizing variables and parameters to make our test more dynamic, but also to prevent any kind of human error. So if, for example, if I set this field to a demo 123, and then I want to go and verify it afterwards, well, then I need to make sure that says 123. And then if I change it to 456, I have to go and change the validation. So anywhere where you're using the same value more than once, we generally recommend using a variable or parameter. And that goes the same for any kind of framework. So that being said, I have a variable already created for a lot of these fields, so I'm going to be using them. So I have a name variable here that's going to populate the broker name. And I'll click Add and Do. Same thing as before. It's letting me know which screen it's on. It's on the broker news screen. And then it's setting the broker name field to Jim Realtor. And then there's a unique ID that it's utilizing to make sure that this broker is unique every time I do it. So that way I'm not creating duplicate records. All right, so I'll fill in a couple of my other fields here the same way I filled that one in. I'm going to utilize my phone variable. And I've created all these variables as part of this particular test case at the very beginning. It's kind of like test parameters. I could also pull these values from a spreadsheet if I wanted to, or an external data source, or from a SQL query, whatever you want to do. Setting my title, setting my email, setting my status. Now, a key point here is I'm going to set the status to a value that's going to be one of the pick list options. So I'm setting it to available. And when I change this field from a text type to a pick list, it's going to have two options that'll say unavailable and available. So setting it to one that's already going to be there is critical to this working properly in the future. So kind of anticipating the future development. And this kind of illustrates the fact that developers and QAs working closely together definitely can help a lot, because you can have a great insight into what your tests need to be doing. And the developer knows how the QA is actually testing the application. They can kind of account for that. So if I, as a developer, know that they're already using a test that's referring to the status field and they're using this particular value, then I probably want to be thinking about including that into my development effort. So that's all the fields that I want to add for this particular broker record. And I'm going to add my save button here as a last step. Now, one thing I want to point out, every UI action that you take here has the option to take a screenshot before or after the step executes. So if I want to do that, I can just capture the visible area. If I have a very long screen with a lot of fields, or it has, some scrolling there, then I usually do the entire page to capture all of that in a single screenshot. It's worth noting here that you don't have to take a screenshot, and you don't have to add these at every test step if you're worried about things working properly and having that in the report. If anything fails in the test, like if there is a validation error or an element is not present on the page or something like that, Provar will automatically take a screenshot of the screen at that time. So you don't need to worry about adding screenshots unless you just want them for reporting purposes. So I'm going to add that in there just so I have that, so I can show you what it looks like. But I'll add that save button and that broker record will be created. Now what I want to do is I want to add a validation point for the broker that I just created. I could do it in the UI just by doing the same methods that I've already been doing, by right-clicking on the fields, adding them to my test case. And what we have is an actual action that is read assert. So if I set this to read assert, I can assert the value to make sure that it's the correct value. And again, I don't want to use a static value. I could use an actual variable here. So that's a perfectly acceptable way of doing validations. However, doing them in the UI can be a little bit slower and maybe less reliable, I'll say. So generally speaking, once we create something, if we don't need to actually do something in the UI, we generally recommend doing it through the API instead. And we actually make that really easy to do in Provar and integrate it into our UI automation. So I'm going to go ahead and just minimize this session. I'm going to keep it running. And I'm going to switch over to my Provar automation client, which is a desktop tool that's installed on my local machine. So this is where I'm running my test case currently. So if you look in the center of my screen here, this shows the test case that I've currently been creating called Create Broker. And we can see all the steps are laid out, very human readable format. And we see all the variables being used there in the little curly brackets. So what I want to do now is kind of give you a brief overview of what the application is. So of course I have my navigator. This includes my test project, all of my test artifacts, which would be my test cases, any kind of data sources that I'm using, as well as any kind of test plans that I've defined. So test plan would basically be a group of test cases and how I want to run them. So do I run them against Chrome, Edge, what Salesforce environment I want to target, and things like that. But what I want to focus on here is the bottom right of my screen. This is the org browser. Now, what this does is this gives me access to all of the metadata for the Salesforce org that I'm connected to. So that would be things like the objects and the custom fields, the tabs, the pages, and all the related lists and things like that. What I can do is I can actually filter this list looking for the object that I want to interact with. So I want to interact with the broker object. And I can click on it here, and it'll show me a preview or a snapshot of the data in the org that I'm connected to. So you can see that broker object that I just created there, which was 13BDG. So that was the latest record there. You can see that created. So I can just kind of look at my data, and if I double click on this, it'll open up the record, and I can view all of the different fields here as well. So it just kind of gives you visibility. It works a lot like a SOQL editor, that kind of thing. But what I want to utilize this for specifically is interacting with these objects using SOQL in our built-in API. So if I click and drag this object into my test case, this dialog window opens up where I can interact using CRUD permissions or a custom SOQL query step. So I'm going to do a read assert step. Now this opens up another window with all of the fields for the broker object. So I want to go ahead and add my assertions for all the fields that I have created here and input data for. So that would be things like the status, And I'm going to type in here so I don't click the wrong one. So we got title, we got name, we got phone, and let's see, email. And I'll click OK. So what that has done is that has added a SOQL step or an API call here that's going to read a broker record from the Salesforce database for the org that I'm connected to. And I have all these assertions here. You can see where it says 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5. All of those are my different test result assertions. So what it's looking for here is an object ID. And this is the ID of the broker that I want to read. Now, I could just as easily copy the ID from here and paste it into my my editor here inside of Provar. But the problem with that is, of course, if I run this test case again, that ID is going to be different each time I run the test because it's going to create a new broker. So I don't want to do that because that's obviously not very future thinking of me, not very maintainable. So what I want to do instead is utilize, again, a variable. So I'll open up my content assist here, and we actually have a variable that's created automatically for us whenever we create records through Provar Salesforce connections. So this broker ID actually refers to whatever broker that I just created up above. So if I save this now, I'm going to go ahead and add in all my assertions. So I want to make sure the status is equal to status. I want to make sure that title is equal to title. I want to make sure the name is equal to name. And you kind of get the picture here. So I'll go through here and just making sure that all of the fields have been set properly and are reading correctly from the Salesforce database. Email. And I'll save that. Now I've been editing this in my automation client here. So this is Provar Studio. And now I'm going to switch over to Test Builder again. Now, if you look at Test Builder, it's added that step already for me. So it's actually syncing the two. So any changes I make on one will be reflected in the other. So that read step there for the broker ID is already in place. My mouse keeps getting frozen. Where am I at?
I see your mouse. Oh, wait, I did see it. It went away.
Yeah, I think it's like it's moving on the screen, but it's not moving on mine. I'm trying to, I don't know what's happening.
Uh-oh.
Turn this off and turn it back on.
You see it?
I can see it in the sharing, but I can't see it on my screen.
No. That's a bummer.
My cursor has disappeared. Let me stop sharing real quick. Sorry to interrupt. Man, I totally just threw off my own groove. There we go. It's back. All right. We're back in action. Sorry about that. Yeah. So where was I? So I added this step here to read and validate that broker that just created. And the reason, again, that I did this in the API, like I said, I could just as easily have done it in the UI. There'd been no issue with that. But I can do it in a single step through the API, and it's very easy to add new fields that I want to validate here. And also, as you'll see, whenever I click resume, it's going to execute very quickly because it's just reading an object from the database and it's doing all those field comparisons. So in Test Builder, I just click resume and it's going to continue on. And we see that this comes back as green, which I always love to see that green. And I view the test step output and we can see all those result assertions there. So everything looks gravy, as we say in the South. And I'm going to resume and finalize this test case here. Okay, so that test case is done. And what I mean by that is I've created a test case that I can rerun, right? So I parameterize everything. I use variables. I added a validation in there. So I've added some steps to create a broker with some dynamic fields. So now what I want to do is I want to make a change to the broker object. I want to add that status and I want to change it to a pick list. So the way that I'm going to do that is utilizing Salesforce DX commands. So within my Visual Studio Code, which is what you're looking at now, I'm going to just show you kind of what my environment looks like here. So I'm connected to a Scratch org. I have a development hub here. This Scratch org is actually the org that I was just doing my testing in. So this is where I'm going to make the change in this particular org here. So I already have the change kind of set here because I do terrible at typing when I'm in front of an audience. So I already made the change. So the change is here where I'm adding these different pick list values for the status. So I'm going to copy this over and I'm just going to replace what's already there. And I'm going to save it. So now within my structure of my project, if you're familiar with Salesforce DX, you have all of your project details, which basically all the metadata that makes up your org is defined here. So anything from objects to layouts to LWC components, flexi pages, permission sets, the whole gambit. Everything that makes your org unique can be defined within this Salesforce DX project. So I already have my project set up and I already have, everything's been synced. So any kind of changes I make, I can look at the change here that I just made. So we can see this is the change as it looks in source control. So you can see where the changes are. Any kind of changes I make can be pushed using Salesforce DX commands directly into that org using those metadata changes there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. This is my push command. So I'm going to push my source directly into that Scratch org. That should only take a second. And again, it's only one component. You can see the change here where it changed the status field for the broker object. And you can see the file that it's referring to, which is the file I have open here as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and play it back, right? So I have that test case built out. So now I want to illustrate running the same test case that I've just built utilizing that change. Before I just go ahead and run the test case, I want to show how Provar works from a metadata perspective. So within this org browser, of course, you saw me interacting with the broker object and showing you some records here. But I can also reload all of the org details using this little recycle option here. It's a little bitty tiny icon on my screen. But basically what this allows me to do is reload all of the metadata for the org that I'm connected to. And the reason I have to do this is because it's cached locally. So that way it's not constantly polling Salesforce and trying to retrieve all the metadata changes. So I have to manually kind of do that just to pull in all the changes. So now what I have is I should have an updated cache of all the metadata changes for the broker and any kind of other changes that I would have made to this particular org. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set a pause here just to make sure that I'm the change is reflected in the UI before it kicks off, because sometimes it takes a minute to actually take effect whenever I push that. And I'll launch my test builder. So again, I'm launching test builder, which this first thing that's happening is it's connecting to Salesforce. This Salesforce connect step takes care of a lot of things for me. It opens up my browser, it logs me into Salesforce as the correct user, and it also takes me to whatever Salesforce application that I want to start my testing in. In this case, I am in the Dreamhouse app. So let me adjust my browser here so that way it's formatted properly. And get my arrows. There we go. Beautiful. All right. So right back where we started, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the broker object. It doesn't look like it's been reflected yet. So sometimes I have to go here and actually do a quick refresh. Seems silly, but when I do that, there it is. Okay, so now it's a pick list. So we could see it's a pick list and it has all these options available. So I'm not going to do anything in my test case. All I'm going to do is hit resume. So this is going to do the same thing that I did before. Again, it's going to navigate me to the broker tab. It's going to click the new button. It's going to continue to fill out all of my fields using dynamic data for the broker name, the phone, and then it's going to set the status to available. Even though it's a pick list, I'm setting it to that same value as before. So no changes required for my test. Et voila. And it clicks the save button, takes me a nice little screenshot there. And of course, I have my final step here, which is the validation point. So once no test is complete without some kind of validation. If I'm just doing a bunch of steps, if I don't have any validation, I'm not really testing anything. So having this read step in there, while it may seem a bit redundant, it is critical to the process because there could be some things that happen along the way. And maybe you're creating additional records and you want to validate that all the data is as you expect it to be. So there you have it. So that is the creation of my broker. I ran the same test case. I made a change from a development side of things. And really what this shows you, right? What have I illustrated? So kind of, I'll switch over to my slides now and I'll give you a quick recap. So what did I do? So I ran a test case to create the broker in the Dreamhouse application. I deployed a change from a developer perspective, and then I ran the same test against the new changes. So actually, that's a pretty powerful thing, right? So as a QA and a developer working together, or maybe you're working with an architect or an admin, whoever's doing your testing, right? To be able to work closely and be able to have an idea of what kind of testing they're doing and what the developer is doing from changing things, having that close relationship is very critical. So I illustrated kind of two different personas here, right? First, I was the QA. I was building out a test case using an automation framework, Provar in this case. And then I was shifting to the developer persona where I'm making a change, I'm pushing it into the environment, and then the developer could either run the test case directly themselves, or they could just queue the QA or whatever kind of pipeline they're using to run the test from there. So just kind of illustrating the full process here of what I've demonstrated. And really what this shows you is how you can get a lot more flexibility and control of the changes that you deploy to your applications by using command line operations in Salesforce DX, and also working closely with your QA teams. All right. So at that point, I think I have my information on the screen, but I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my Q&A slide here. If there's been any questions that have came in either through the chat or questions that you have now, I will be happy to take those.
I do have actually a couple of questions. First question is, as you have shown me this this automation, do we have any API available wherein I can call this automation through REST API or whatever APIs? What?
So are you talking about in terms of triggering the automation to
Yes.
run? You mean?
Right.
So typically the way that would work is we would integrate with some kind of CI solution. So that would be like GitHub Actions, Jenkins, Circle CI, Flowsome, Capado, GearSet, AutoRabbit, the whole gambit of release management tools. We integrate with those. So that's typically how that would work, is that we would run a pipeline.
Yes, actually these integrations are fine, but right now when I look at Provar, so I'm looking it not only as a QA perspective, but consider if I want to perform certain actions repetitively. So from Salesforce, if I want to call this automation all the time, not for testing, consider I want to do some payment, right, on third-party system. So which will take all the data and go to third-party website and do certain actions all the time. So I want to do that action on all the records in Salesforce. So is there any automation available or any APIs available wherein I can do that? So
yeah, you can run the tests from the command line. So that's typically the way that you would do it, is that you would kind of like how I've set up my test here in my desktop client, right? So the way that we work is we have our command line interfaces via Ant. So it's similar to Maven. Like we have an Ant build file basically that defines which test case.
Can I call this through Salesforce?
Yeah, so this can be triggered from external sources like that. Yeah, so that would be a yes.
Okay, and one more question. Just now I saw this. It involved the UI actions on the browser. Is there any way wherein this can happen through like kind of like headless Chrome or something, wherein the UI elements are not involved?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a headless Chrome option, so I could easily run this test case now, and it would launch in a headless browser. And the cool thing there, I don't know how it works. It's like black magic, but you still get the screenshots even when you're running in Chrome headless. So
because actually I have used UiPath in the past, so I know actually. So this headless Chrome, how it works. Well, this is cool. Okay, but like, what are the major differences between the existing RPAs and this Provar? Because when I see in the system, like we have like automation anywhere, then we have UiPath, and there are certain other RPA solutions in the market. So how that is distinguished from existing one? Provar is how the Provar is unique.
Yeah, so I mean, the big differentiator right away is just how quickly you could begin testing, right? So kind of how you saw me jump in here and create a test case. I'm just right-clicking and interacting with my Salesforce org directly. And it's worth noting that this is, of course, a custom object. So I could utilize the same strategy for any kind of custom functionality in my org. So having that kind of close relationship with Salesforce that we've been a partner for several years, and we've been doing this for over 8 years as a company. So we have a lot of history with Salesforce, but also we have releases that coincide directly with Salesforce releases. So like the summer, spring, and winter releases, we have releases that go along with that, and we've already made changes to account for any kind of layout changes, or if they've changed buttons or default functionality. We've kind of already caught that and made changes to make sure that we're still compatible.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That
Yep.
that was really helpful. And maybe last question, how does the licensing work? Like, do you need to purchase the license per user, or it's like per org, or
Yeah,
how?
so you can connect to as many orgs as you want. There's no limitation or restriction there. The license is floating. So if I have a single user license, like I'm running it on my machine, if someone else wanted to use the license, I would need to close out a Provar and then they could use it. So that's the way the floating license model works.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Great questions, though.
Hello. Question. First one is there a way to export all these tests that you created and like track them in GitHub or something else, like just import them and have them, export them and then import them later and reuse them? And
Yeah, go ahead.
and like, can you, for example, like, if you have already created a test case, can you use it in different environments, or is it like just strictly for just one domain name? These are my questions.
Yeah, great questions. I appreciate it. So the first question, we do have a direct integration with Git. So any kind of Git-based version control, such as GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, CircleCI, Azure DevOps, all those would be natively supported. So we could basically, I'm actually connected to a GitHub project on this particular one that you see here. So this is checked into a GitHub repo already. And so all that's integrated directly. So for as far as collaboration, if I check in my changes that I've made, like to this create broker test case, someone else could pull the changes down on their instance of Provar, and they would have the same test case. And you also get the history going along with Git. As far as the second question, I just lost my train of thought. You were talking about, can you repeat?
Using the same test case for different environments.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a part of our, I don't want to say it's like our main feature, but that's something that we definitely pride ourselves on, is that you shouldn't have to create multiple test cases for multiple environments. That can be kind of a pain to manage and scale out, right? So this same test case that I'm running here, I could change to a different org and run the same test case against that org, provided, of course, all the, the necessary things are there. Like if I have this Dreamhouse app deployed to another org and I've made the same change, I could run the same test case there to verify it in that environment. And I could also run as different users very easily as well. So one thing I didn't have time to kind of get into when I was demoing, my mouse is delaying again. Where is it at? Sorry. It's weird. It shows up on the screen. Okay, there it is. Okay. So if I'm looking at, again, in my desktop here, I have test settings, which shows all my connections. So this is my Salesforce connection that I was utilizing, where I'm connected to my Scratch org. And this is actually one of the environments that I'm connected to. So I have this connection set up to override for 4 different orgs. So I have a UAT, a dev, and a production. And if I want to target a different org or a different environment, I can easily change this just by changing it here. So if I want to go to dev and run the same test case, it's going to run against a different org. So that's how easy that is. Now, if I want to run against a different user, it's kind of the same thing. So let's say I want to run as a sales user profile. I can set up a connection here in Salesforce, and I can follow my steps to create a normal connection. And then we have this connection type to log in as via an admin connection. So I can use that admin connection to log on as other users. So I don't have to know that user's credentials or have that saved to my test or anything like that. So that would create a connection that logs in as that particular user profile. So basically the same thing as if you're in Salesforce and you go to setup and then you go search users and then you find the user you want to log into and you click login as. This is replicating that same functionality, but it's doing it all kind of behind the scenes.
Perfect. And like, can you use this to test like LWC and their displays? For example, check if I click on this, I have 6 records displayed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we do support Lightning Web Components and Flexi Pages and Visualforce Pages, like all the custom functionality. So not just standard Salesforce, right? So what I was showing you is pretty standard. But like if we were to do something in, I think there's a, yeah. So like these are LWC components. So all of these I could interact with the same way that you saw me interact with these particular fields. The main difference is if you're working with LWC, there's not a lot of times metadata tied to those particular fields because they're JavaScript based and there's no metadata information for them available. So what that means is we do have to use our own kind of custom locating strategy for finding those components. It is still more reliable than just traditional XPath, but it is something that if this field were to change, it is slightly less reliable than if we had metadata access to those components. So it is a little more tricky, but something that we're constantly improving. And then the second part of your question, I'm sorry, can you repeat?
I think I got all my question answered.
Okay.
Thank you so much for presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your questions. Any other questions? I know we're at the top of our time.
Yeah, one last question for me. Is there a trial or a trial use or something like this for Provar?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you are interested in getting a trial, we can definitely connect after the fact and we can get you set up. There is a trial period where you can install it and play with it in either one of our sandboxes or one of your sandboxes just to kind of see how it works. But yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I'll go ahead and just before I go off, I want to put up my contact again. My email is pretty easy. It's my first name last name at provartesting.com. So if you want to follow up, I'm always happy to continue the conversation. And there's a bit.ly link for my LinkedIn. Again, you can just find me by searching Michael Dailey and you should see my smiling face there. But yeah, that's all I got. Thank you so much for allowing us the time, Amal. Been a great host.
So Akila and Lakshmi, they are saying thank you so much for. I can see one. They're putting everything in the chat, so maybe you can see that.
Yes, yeah, I see. Thank you, and thank you for the kind words.
Before we end completely, I'm wondering, could we do a quick screenshot, like little photo, little group photo? Everyone, if they can, turn their camera on. We can just take a cute little picture. Is that possible?
I mean, I can do it. I think a couple people left already, but yeah, I can do that.
Okay, I would love that. Yeah, I see a couple of people have left already. I'm like, oh, come back. Michael, can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh yeah.
And there we go.
There we go.
We have a group over there, by the way.
Yeah, I see that.
That's
it's a group of folks. Hey, y'all. All right. If everyone can get in as close as they can, there we go. Let's do this beautiful photo. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Got it. Thank you so much. And just so everybody,
thank you.
Everybody knows, we will be doing a raffle for a Salesforce certificate voucher. So if your name isn't on here, because I see that because there's a group of you, if you would just get your names to Amal, and then he'll get them to me, and then we'll run the raffle, and then we'll send out an email letting you know who won the raffle. So we're so excited again for just this opportunity and to see all your lovely faces and get to hear Michael present. Really appreciate it, Michael. That was really good. And I've heard these so many times, and each time I'm like, oh, you can do that? Oh, every time, it's, you would think that I've only been here like one day. So I really appreciate you. And Amal, it has been such a joy to work with you and come alongside you as you build this group of people who are awesome and building community.
No, thank you, Michael, for this beautiful event and presentation, and also Mika, thanks for coordination. I have put in my email ID there, so whoever wants to be part of raffle, just send me your email ID, so I can just share it with Mika, and you guys get chance to win certification voucher. So if you guys see the chat, I've already added my email there, so
Yeah.
you guys can take a look. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Micah. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you again for having us, Amal.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Mhm.
అన్ని పెట్టేసి 3 పెట్టేసి విద్యా డాట్ నాలెడ్జ్ తీసి